The evening air in Manhattan carried the scent of autumn leaves mixed with the sophisticated aroma of expensive perfumes and champagne. Victoria Chase adjusted her simple black dress for the 10th time as she stood outside the Whitmore Gallery. Watching streams of elegantly dressed people flow through the glass doors, her artist friend Emma had insisted she attend this opening, claiming it would be good for her career. But Victoria felt completely out of place among New York's elite. Her worn leather portfolio clutched tightly in her hands, Victoria took a deep breath and stepped inside. The gallery hummed with conversation, clinking glasses, and the soft jazz music that seemed to float from hidden speakers. Paintings lined the pristine white walls, each accompanied by price tags that made Victoria's student budget seem laughable. She moved carefully through the crowd, trying to avoid bumping into anyone while admiring the artwork. Near the back of the gallery, Victoria stopped before a striking abstract painting that seemed to capture the chaos and beauty of city life. The swirling colors reminded her of her own work, though she doubted any of her paintings would ever hang in such a prestigious space. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the tall man approaching from her left until it was too late. The collision happened in slow motion. Victoria turned just as the stranger stepped closer to examine the same painting, and her elbow caught his wine glass perfectly. The deep red liquid arced through the air like a crimson rainbow before splashing across his crisp white shirt and expensive suit jacket. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," Victoria gasped, her face burning with embarrassment. She fumbled in her small purse for tissues, finding only a crumpled napkin from her morning coffee. "I didn't see you there? I was just looking at the painting and I turned too quickly." The man stood perfectly still for a moment, looking down at his wine-stained shirt. Victoria expected anger, maybe even shouting, but when he lifted his eyes to meet hers, she saw something unexpected. His deep blue eyes held amusement rather than fury, and a slow smile spread across his handsome features. "Well," he said, his voice carrying a warm, rich tone that made Victoria's heart skip. It's certainly one way to make an impression. He accepted the napkin she offered, though they both knew it wouldn't do much good against the extensive stain. "I'm Jonathan. You've just given me the perfect excuse to leave this stuffy event early." Victoria felt her cheeks grow even warmer. "I'm Victoria, and I've just ruined your very expensive shirt. Please let me pay for the cleaning, or replacement, or whatever you need. I work at a coffee shop downtown, and I can set aside money from my tips." Jonathan studied her face, taking in her genuine distress and the way she twisted her hands nervously. There was something refreshing about her honest reaction, so different from the calculated politeness he usually encountered at these events. Most people at gallery openings knew exactly who he was. But this young woman clearly had no idea she was talking to one of the city's most successful entrepreneurs. "You know what?" Jonathan said, glancing around the gallery filled with people who wanted something from him. "Why don't you help me in a different way? I was about to escape this place anyway, but I hate dining alone. Would you join me for dinner? Consider it compensation for providing such an entertaining exit strategy." Victoria blinked in surprise. "You want to have dinner with the person who just destroyed your clothes?" "Especially with the person who just destroyed my clothes," Jonathan replied with a grin. "You're the most interesting thing that's happened to me all evening. Besides, I'm curious about what you were thinking while staring at that painting so intently." Something in his tone made Victoria pause. Despite his expensive clothes and confident manner, there was a loneliness in his eyes that she recognized. It was the same feeling she carried as she navigated the city, just trying to make her dreams come true while feeling invisible to most of the world around her. "I suppose I owe you that much," Victoria said, surprised by her own boldness. "But nowhere to fancy? I'm not exactly dressed for five-star restaurants." Jonathan looked at her simple black dress and genuine smile, thinking she looked more beautiful than any of the designer-clad women in the gallery. "I know just the place," he said, offering her his arm. "It's a little Italian restaurant in Brooklyn where nobody will care about wine stains or fancy clothes. They just serve the best pasta in the city." As they walked toward the gallery exit, Victoria couldn't help but wonder what she was getting herself into. She'd come to the gallery hoping to network and maybe find inspiration for her art. But instead she was leaving with a mysterious stranger who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts about painting and life. Jonathan held the door for her as they stepped out into the cool evening air, and Victoria noticed how naturally he moved, as if he was used to taking charge of situations. There was something magnetic about his presence, but also something guarded, as if he was more comfortable asking questions than answering them. "So," Jonathan said, as they walked toward the street, "what did you see in that painting that made you so absorbed?" "Most people just glance at the price tag and move on." Victoria considered her answer carefully. "It reminded me of how I feel in this city sometimes. All these swirling colors and energy, beautiful but overwhelming, like being caught in a storm that might destroy you or transform you, but you can't tell which one it will be." Jonathan stopped walking and turned to look at her fully. In the glow of the streetlights, Victoria could see something shift in his expression, as if her words had touched something deep inside him that he rarely let anyone see. "That's exactly what I see too," he said quietly. And Victoria realized that whatever was about to happen between them would be far more complicated than a simple dinner date. The small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn felt like stepping into another world. Red checkered tablecloths covered mismatched tables. Candles flickered in old wine bottles, and the air was filled with the rich aroma of garlic and fresh basil. Victoria found herself relaxing for the first time all evening as they settled into a corner booth away from the other diners. Jonathan had removed his stained jacket, rolling up his sleeves, and looking more approachable than he had at the gallery. The waiter, an elderly Italian man with kind eyes, brought them menus and a basket of warm bread without being asked. "This place doesn't look like much," Jonathan said, buttering a piece of bread. "But the owner's grandmother brought her recipes from Sicily 60 years ago. It's one of the few places in the city where I can just be myself." Victoria studied his face in the candlelight, noting the way his shoulders had relaxed and how his smile seemed more genuine now. "What do you mean, be yourself? Who are you when you're not at fancy gallery openings?" For a moment, Jonathan hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "Someone who remembers what it was like to worry about paying rent and whether there would be enough money for groceries. Someone who built something from nothing and sometimes wonders if it was worth the cost." There's a heaviness in his voice that made Victoria lean forward slightly. "You talk like that's all in the past? What do you do now?" "I run a technology company," Jonathan said carefully, watching her reaction. "We develop software that helps other businesses operate more efficiently." "It's not the most exciting dinner conversation." Victoria laughed, the sound light and musical in the warm space. "Are you kidding? I think it's fascinating. I can barely manage to keep my laptop from crashing, but you create programs that help entire companies run better. That's like being a wizard in the modern world." Jonathan felt something tighten in his chest at her genuine enthusiasm. Most people either wanted something from his company or treated his success with a mixture of envy and suspicion. Victoria's honest curiosity was refreshing and dangerous at the same time. "What about you?" he asked, grateful to shift the focus away from his business empire. "Are you an artist?" "I saw you carrying a portfolio earlier." Victoria's cheeks flushed slightly. "I'm trying to be. I'm in my final year at the Art Institute, working on my thesis project while serving coffee to pay for supplies and rent. It's not exactly glamorous, but I love creating things that make people feel something." "What kind of art do you create?" "Paintings, mostly. Urban landscapes, but with an emotional twist. I try to capture how the city makes people feel rather than just how it looks." Victoria paused, then added with self-deprecating humor, "Though apparently I'm better at destroying expensive clothing than creating masterpieces." Jonathan reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "I doubt that very much. Tell me about your thesis project." The contact sent warmth shooting up Victoria's arm, but she tried to focus on his question. "I'm working on a series called Invisible New York. It's about all the people who keep this city running but nobody really sees. The coffee shop workers, the night janitors, the street vendors. I want to show their dignity and importance." "That sounds incredible," Jonathan said, and meant it. "When do you expect to finish?" "Hopefully by spring, if I can afford enough paint to complete all 12 pieces." Victoria laughed. Jonathan could hear the worry beneath her humor. "Art supplies are expensive. The coffee shop doesn't exactly pay enough to cover everything." An idea began forming in Jonathan's mind, but he pushed it aside for now. Instead, he found himself telling Victoria things he rarely shared with anyone. About growing up in a small town where his family struggled to make ends meet. About his first failed business venture that left him sleeping on a friend's couch for 6 months. About the loneliness that came with success when you could never be sure if people liked you or your bank account. Victoria listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions, and sharing her own stories of pursuing dreams in an expensive city where art was often seen as a luxury rather than a necessity. They talked through 3 courses and 2 bottles of wine, the conversation flowing as naturally as if they had known each other for years. As the evening wound down, Jonathan found himself reluctant to let the night end. "Would you like to take a walk? There's a great view of the Manhattan skyline from the promenade." They strolled along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting off the dark water like scattered diamonds. Victoria pulled her thin sweater closer against the cool breeze, and without thinking, Jonathan slipped his arm around her shoulders. "Thank you for tonight," Victoria said softly. "I haven't talked to someone like this in a long time. Most people my age are either stressed about finals or trying to impress each other." "You actually listen?" Jonathan stopped walking and turned to face her. "Victoria, I need to tell you something. I haven't been completely honest about who I am." Something in his tone made Victoria's heart skip. "What do you mean?" "My company, Sterling Technologies, it's not just some small business. We're one of the largest tech firms in the country. I'm not just comfortable, I'm wealthy. Very wealthy." Victoria stared at him, processing this information. She thought about his expensive clothes, the way the gallery staff had treated him with deference, the confidence with which he moved through the world. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because for the first time in years, someone was talking to me like I was just a regular person. Do you know how rare that is when you're in my position? Everyone always wants something." Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. "And what makes you think I don't want something to—" The question hung between them like a challenge. Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. In the dim light, Victoria could just make out the name Jonathan Sterling. CEO and the company logo she now realized she had seen on billboards around the city. Because, Jonathan said quietly, "You spilled wine on me and offered to pay for cleaning from your tip money. Because you're worried about affording paint for your thesis project. Because when you look at me, I don't see dollar signs in your eyes." Victoria looked down at the card, then back at his face. Part of her felt foolish for not recognizing him, but a larger part felt something else entirely. Fear, not of him, but of what this meant for whatever was developing between them. "I don't know anything about your world," she said finally. "And I don't know anything about yours," Jonathan replied. "Maybe that's what makes this interesting." He leaned closer, and Victoria felt her breath catch. "I'd like to see you again, if you're willing to give this a chance, despite who I am." Victoria studied his face in the dim light, seeing vulnerability beneath his confident exterior. "One condition," she said. "Next time, I choose the restaurant. Somewhere that serves food on paper plates and doesn't care if you spill something." Jonathan's smile was radiant. "Deal." 3 weeks had passed since that magical evening in Brooklyn, and Victoria found herself living in 2 different worlds. During the day, she served coffee to hurried business people and worked on her thesis paintings in her tiny studio apartment. But 3 evenings a week, she entered Jonathan's world of private cars, exclusive restaurants, and conversations that shaped the city's future. The contrast should have felt overwhelming, but somehow it worked. Jonathan never made her feel out of place. And Victoria discovered that beneath his business success was a man who genuinely cared about making the world better through technology. She watched him interact with his employees, seeing the respect and loyalty he inspired through fairness rather than fear. However, not everyone approved of their relationship. Victoria's best friend Emma had been skeptical from the beginning. "Victoria, be careful," Emma warned over coffee at their usual diner. "Rich guys like him don't date girls like us for the long term. You're probably just a fun distraction before he marries someone from his own social circle." The words stung because Victoria had wondered the same thing during quiet moments. What did she really have to offer someone who could buy anything he wanted? Meanwhile, Jonathan faced his own challenges. His business partner and oldest friend, Robert Mitchell, had been increasingly vocal about his concerns. "Jonathan, I've seen the gossip columns," Robert said during their weekly strategy meeting. "Dating some art student might be fine for a fling, but think about your reputation. The board of directors, our investors, they expect a certain image from you. My personal life is not up for board approval." Jonathan replied coldly, but Robert's words planted seeds of doubt. Was he being selfish by pursuing Victoria when it might affect his company and the thousands of people who depended on it for their livelihoods? The crisis came on a rainy Thursday evening. Victoria had been looking forward to seeing Jonathan after a particularly difficult day at the coffee shop, where a rude customer had made her question whether she was wasting her time chasing artistic dreams. She needed Jonathan's steady presence and encouraging words. But when she arrived at his penthouse apartment, she found him pacing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was sharp and businesslike, nothing like the gentle tone he used with her. "I don't care what it costs," he was saying. "Buy out their contract and make sure they understand that crossing Sterling Technologies has consequences. I want them to regret even thinking about competing with us." Victoria stood frozen in the doorway, listening to a side of Jonathan she had never heard before. This was the ruthless businessman she had read about in newspaper articles. The one who crushed smaller companies without hesitation. When Jonathan finished the call and turned around, his expression immediately softened upon seeing her. "Victoria, I didn't hear you come in. How was your day? Who were you just threatening?" she asked quietly, setting down her purse with shaking hands. Jonathan's face grew guarded. "It's just business. A competitor was trying to steal one of our major contracts using underhanded tactics. Sometimes you have to respond firmly. Firmly." "You were talking about destroying someone's livelihood." Victoria felt tears threatening. "Is that who you really are when I'm not around?" "Victoria, you don't understand how business works at this level. If I show weakness, it doesn't just affect me. It affects every person who works for my company. Every family that depends on those jobs. And what about the families that depend on the company you just destroyed?" Victoria shot back. "Do they not matter because they work for your competitor instead of for you?" The argument that followed was their first real fight, filled with accusations and misunderstandings. Victoria accused Jonathan of being exactly the kind of heartless businessman she had always despised. Jonathan accused Victoria of being naive about the realities of running a major corporation. "Maybe Emma was right," Victoria said finally, her voice breaking. "Maybe we're just too different. You live in a world where money solves everything and power justifies anything. I can't be part of that." She left that night, and for a week, neither of them called the other. Victoria threw herself into her art, painting with an intensity born from heartbreak. The canvases that emerged were raw and emotional, capturing the pain of loving someone whose world seemed incompatible with her values. Jonathan, meanwhile, found himself unable to focus on work. Every business decision felt hollow without Victoria's voice in his head asking whether it was the right thing to do, not just the profitable thing. The turning point came when Victoria received an unexpected visitor at the coffee shop. A well-dressed woman in her 50s approached the counter with a warm smile. "Excuse me, are you Victoria Chase?" "I'm Margaret Sterling. It's Jonathan's mother." Victoria's heart raced as she recognized the kind eyes that were so similar to Jonathan's. "Mrs. Sterling. I don't think Jonathan would want you talking to me right now, actually." "He doesn't know I'm here," Margaret said, ordering a simple coffee and gesturing to a quiet corner table. "But I needed to meet the woman who has made my son question everything about how he lives his life." They talked for over an hour. Margaret told Victoria about Jonathan's childhood, how his father's small business had been destroyed by a larger corporation's predatory practices, leaving the family struggling for years. That experience shaped Jonathan in ways both good and bad, Margaret explained. It made him determined to succeed, but it also made him believe that being ruthless was the only way to protect what matters. "Until he met you, I don't think he ever questioned whether there might be another way." "What do you mean?" "He's been restructuring his entire approach to business since your fight, reviewing every contract, changing policies to be more ethical, even if it costs money. He calls it the Victoria test. asking whether he could explain each decision to you without feeling ashamed. Victoria felt her heart skip. He said that. Margaret smiled. My son loves you, Victoria. And more importantly, you've made him want to be better than he thought he needed to be. That's not something he should lose because of one terrible argument. That evening, Victoria found herself standing outside Jonathan's office building as employees streamed out for the day. When Jonathan emerged, his face showed the strain of their separation, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. Victoria, I owe you an apology, she said before he could speak. I judged you without trying to understand the pressures you face. That wasn't fair. No, I owe you an apology, Jonathan replied, stepping closer. You were right to call me out. I had become so focused on winning that I forgot to ask whether what I was winning was worth having. They found themselves at the same Brooklyn restaurant where they had shared their first real conversation. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, they talked honestly about their fears, their differences, and their hopes for the future. I can't promise I'll never make business decisions that seem harsh, Jonathan said, but I can promise that I'll always ask myself what kind of man I want to be for you, and let that guide me. And I can't promise I'll always understand your world, Victoria replied. But I can promise to trust that your heart is in the right place, even when your methods seem foreign to me. 6 months later, Victoria's thesis exhibition opened at a small but prestigious gallery in Soho. The Invisible New York series had evolved to include not just service workers, but also portraits of people from all walks of life who contributed to the city's heartbeat. The centerpiece was a painting of Jonathan, not in his usual expensive suit, but in casual clothes, working alongside volunteers at a community center, his company now funded. Jonathan stood beside Victoria as critics and art lovers moved through the exhibition, watching her field questions about her work with growing confidence. When a prominent collector offered to buy the entire series for an amount that would pay for Victoria's art supplies for years, Jonathan felt prouder than he had after closing any business deal. So, he whispered in her ear as they watched people admire her paintings, ready to take on the world together. Victoria leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. As long as we remember to see the people in it, not just the opportunities. Deal, Jonathan said, echoing their first agreement. And this time, Victoria knew they both meant it for a lifetime.